and welcome to part 14. After the mind-boggling measurements from the last part, we're going to continue. This is sexual content. With her massive breasts hanging down to her waist and two penis-like members dropping further still. She knew she looked grotesque. Well, I'm glad she thinks the same. I'm glad she thinks, just kind of a WTF moment. Her breasts would have been grotesque on any frame, even a fat she-orc, but on her otherwise slim 5'10" height, they were worse. Her lovely face stared back at her from the mirror. Once that high-cheeked, violet-eyed visage would have caught the gaze of any male. Now, all they saw were her boobs. Some still gazed appreciatively at them, mostly the human traders, but few did. Many even had the temerity to gape in appalled wonder. She no longer cared. Her husband despised her and sought some way to banish her. Her handmaidens came near her only when absolute duty required. They had long ago given up trying to handsomely clothe her bosom, and now only gave her tent-like shirts. And the court had become mute and silent every evening she went to the hall. She rarely did so now. Instead, she spent her days gazing out the window, looking like a maiden in need of rescue, except for her lascivious stares at any stallion that happened to drop its cock in her sight. She loved her breasts. They were sensitive from tip to root. Their heft she found erotic. The nipples were pleasure foci that now outperformed her clit. She even took pleasure from the blue veins that spread from the areola, stark beneath her alabaster skin. They were somehow both disgusting and erotic, like the thick veins that had pulsed on the Orc King's cock. Celebrian turned sideways to the mirror and got onto all fours. Even with her back straight and high, her breasts rested firmly on the ground, her nipples embraced in the warm bulk of her flesh. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her breasts were fat and full. They did not stretch to her waist because they were empty, sagging bags. No, they were still firm and voluminous. They even flexed outwards a bit when she put more weight on them, definitely not the sign of flab. They looked like firm pillars, as thick as her thighs. She realized that she looked like a strange six-legged beast, and laughed. She rolled onto her back, positioning each breast with both hands to avoid rolling onto one. Movement had begun to require special planning, rolling over in bed or swinging around a corner in the palace. Both had their risks these days. In the mirror she looked something like a mother nursing two huge plump worms. A breast lay on either side of her, fat and round. She reached down and began to stroke her nipples. They hardened a little more, still not cock-hard, but firm all the same. Firm and tender, her body reminded her with a shudder. She reached down and hefted one breast towards her mouth with both hands so that she could suck the nipple. The breast sat heavy and warm against her face, almost smothering her as she sucked the fat nipple. An inch breadth of nipple was no broad or cock, but it was sweet all the same. Plus it had the added benefit of satisfying her mouth and body at the same time. For a few minutes she worked the nipple in and out by grasping the breast in both hands and heaving. She glanced at the mirror and smiled at the image. She had one breast splayed out on the floor beside her, and teased the nipple of the nipple of the other in her small, pert mouth. Holding her breast in place with her grip on the nipple, she worked the other breast towards her pussy. What? She could get the nipple to dangle into her open, wet lips, but the angle was wrong for inserting it. She rolled her weight onto her upper back so that her ass was in the air, and her feet hit the ground behind her ears. The nipple in her mouth fell out as she crunched her stomach. The breast was too big to remain in the confined space between twat and head, and it fell to the other side like the other. For a time she looked into the lavender lips of her pussy. It glistened with her moisture. She worked her clitoris free from its fold and flicked it casually. Too bad it had not grown with her nipples. She could have given herself a blow-job. She caught a falling drop of pussy juice onto her tongue. Turning back to her breast, she took the right one in both hands and put the nipple back into her mouth. The breast bulged in an arc. It was still firm enough so that the bend was somewhat painful, but she didn't mind. She held it in place with the firm grip of her lips on the nipple, while she worked the other ones towards the twat that she could no longer see behind the mass of her right breast resting on her face. Blindly, she worked the left nipple into her slit. It slid in easily. Her pussy was still quite wide from her exercise with the Orc King, as well as the magic cock. It slid around a bit in her soaking pussy, but it would do. Gingerly, she moved one hand back to her right breast so that each now had a hand to work it. Each breast required two to position it accurately, but with care she could work one nipple in and out of her slurping mouth, while the other made its own wet splashing sound in her... Who thinks of the specifics behind how this would work? What did you plan on paper, like how this would work? I mean, who does that? Who does that? What? I don't understand. I don't understand the mind behind this. I want to meet this person and just ask why. Why? Oh, let's continue. If she was back in the Orc lair, she would be calling herself Titty Sucker and Booby Fucker, she thought with a laugh. She almost said it out loud, but she feared losing her hold on her right breast. She looked at herself in the mirror again, rolled on her back, legs touching behind her head, a boob stuffed in her twat and the other in her mouth. She looked like a one-elf orgy. She worked both nipples into their respective orifices. The one in her twat was too loose to give more than a pleasant warmth, but the one in her mouth she sucked hard. Rings of pleasure radiated from the great dick-sized teat. Her body tensed with oncoming orgasm. With 3 bucks she came hard. A few more sucks on the teat in her mouth, and another few plunges into her twat, and she was spent for the moment. "I'm a shameless whore," she said to herself. "Yes, you are." She felt a faint twinge of remorse and true shame, but not much. She was long past the point of real regret. Celebrian let a hand travel from hip to shoulder and onto her right breast. It gave her a thrill to contrast her still slim, tight ass and stomach to the great plump breast. While she lay naked on the floor of her room, she heard the thump of hard, hobnailed soles. Instantly she recognized the sound as that of Orc boots. She rose and threw her nightgown over her. It was sheer garment that hid nothing of her flesh. She had just donned the garment when Manet threw the door open. Manet's sword was out and dripped with blood. Behind him were 4 orcs leering at her in surprise and wonder. And we're going to stop there. What will happen next? Who knows? Possibly more disturbing acts of weirdness.